Welcome to 2023 and our Kirby Connects Chronological Bible Edition. Now, what our goal is this year is, by the way, we have Emery Sears in the house. Hey. We have Clayton, Hello. Who is the producer-director, and a little touchy about it today. Oh, and then I'm in here as well. And so our goal is to help you understand the Bible as one big story, as one big narrative. And so we're not going to get bogged down in a lot of the minutia that we kind of talked about last year. You feel free to text us with questions. We'll be glad to respond to them, and we would love that as well. But we want to tell the story of God's plan for redemption, of God's desire to be with humanity. Emmanuel, God with us, you know, the Christmas story. From Genesis to Revelation, you know, it starts with God, the Bible does, in the Garden of Eden, with humanity, and it ends with God in paradise with humanity, you know, the saved from all ages. Yeah. And God has always wanted to be with people, and so we want to help you see that story as a whole. So we might skip over maybe something that you have an interest in or a topic, question you want to ask about it. So again, you can just email Emery, and he knows all.
He knows how to forward.
He knows how to forward.
He knows how to forward to Pastor Mike and Clayton.
And then let's Emery just bring everybody up to, because you've done a great job keeping us informed on the Bible study. Tell us where we're at on the wrapping up the first year.
Awesome. So the day that this comes out, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, the days that this comes out, they'll also be the last week of our 2022 Bible.
Yes. Yep.
So this is the last Monday that you'll have two. After that, just one, and that'll be all the chronological Bible. But so you can finish strong. You still have till the 17th of January to finish up from last year, because we started on the 17th. And hopefully you started the chronological on the 1st, so you're doubling up for 17 days, and then you're off and running, and it clears out a little bit for just chronological for the rest.
Great. And we do want you to finish strong, and so if you're a little bit behind, man, finish strong, and then let Emery know, because we've got, once the 17th happens, you'll start hearing about a date on the calendar that we just want to celebrate, get everybody who read through the Bible, and we're going to celebrate it, have a fun night, and thank the Lord for His goodness and grace, and so it's going to be great. So, guys, we're in a new year. Yes. 2023. Christmas is just done, and we were talking about our Christmas gifts.
Yes.
And Clayton got some nice Christmas gifts, and I got one really special gift, but
if there's a winner and a loser.
There are no winners.
If there's a first and then everybody else.
Everybody else. Go
it
ahead.
was very clear who was first.
In this room.
You could even say somebody was leading the race.
Leading the race.
Way ahead of the pack.
Way ahead of the pack.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Just, you know, pedal to the metal.
Emery Andretti.
Emery Andretti. Yes. Ford versus Ferrari. Tell us what you got. Tell us your favorite.
I got a really big bag of Reese cups.
No.
We're going to slide away so the lightning bolt can...
well, I did get that, but what they're referring to is my darling wife, who like always looks for unusual things because I'm an unusual guy. She got me 3 laps in a Ferrari, is it 488 or 488 GTB. I get to drive that
Google
puppy.
That, people.
488 GTB. I get to drive that puppy for 3 laps, and Clayton has discovered the top speed is 205 miles an hour.
Yes.
0 to 60 in how
3 seconds.
3 seconds.
3 seconds.
Yeah. Do I seem coordinated enough to be in that car?
Well, we'll find out. You know?
We will. Automatic.
We will.
Gotta be super
it is. It's an automatic,
it's
which
automatic.
is my saving grace, because I would burn up the clutch if that were needed.
Yeah, and so Emery, if he goes 175,
yes,
he'll be done in 2.5 minutes.
It'll be quick.
It will. It'll be really quick. But 175 is their wish for me.
Yes.
Mine is to probably less than that and to walk away.
Oh, no. We have set the bar.
Yes.
We have set the standard. Yes. 175. Somehow we want to put a camera on. I would imagine there's this readout somewhere, with all the technology that's there that we could see how fast you're going.
Oh, man.
And so help me, if you stay under 100 miles, if you're under 150,
Wow!
man, what would be like the
Fastest
the-
straightaway speed can't
maybe
be
I
more than
think
150.
if he does that, then the next week after, he has to drive everywhere under 30.
Oh, come on!
in
You'll
the
know
church
how
van?
impatient I am.
No, we don't want
Shut
people
up,
mad at the
us.
church.
No, that's true. I don't want people mad at the church. But anyway, that's pretty fun. So we're excited for that. So let's dig into the scriptures. All right.
All right.
Now, we've looked at we've looked at Adam and Eve and their children. We looked at original sin in Genesis 3. We were introduced to Abraham in Genesis 12. We were introduced to Isaac last week. And Isaac is kind of he's a guy who had tremendous opportunity, probably didn't embrace all the opportunities that was presented to himself. He was a wealthy stock owner, farmer, not so much farmer, but livestock owner. You can learn from his life that patience often brings rewards. God will keep his promise.
Yeah.
And then he had 2 children, and those caused problems in his home because the parents played favorites.
Yep.
And so there's a lot to learn from Isaac and his life and his story. And so now we pick up in chapter 25, and in chapter 25, what we come to see, let me catch up to verse 25, is that Abraham dies.
Yep.
And that's the first significant things that happens. Now, you got to remember, Abraham receives one of the 4 major covenants in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And that covenant was that God would create God would bless the world through Abraham's offspring. And they would be a people, a mighty nation. They would have a land. And that the third thing is that all the world would be blessed.
Yeah.
Now, Abraham came from the Babylonian region,
Yeah.
polytheistic. And now this one God calls him to leave that, to go to a land that he's never seen. How would you like to have that conversation?
Doesn't know where he's going.
Doesn't know where
Yeah.
he's
You'll
going.
know when you get there.
You'll know when you get there. Honey, pack up. We're leaving.
Yeah.
Where are we
Fun
going?
conversation.
Don't know.
Where are we going?
Don't know.
I don't know. When are we coming back? We're not. But all my friends are here. All I'm telling you is we got to go. Why? Because God told me. Which one?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you would say
Yeah.
in Babylon. Which one? And his only thing I can tell you is that the God told me to go.
Yeah.
And he uprooted his family, nearest kin, father, who died halfway to the promised land. And so he passes away. And it's not this big, majestic kind of burial. It's not, in our time frame that we're doing this. Pope Francis has passed, Barbara Walters has passed, and everybody's playing in these
Very big deal.
big deal,
To multiple services.
Yes, everywhere, and for Abraham,
Buried him with Sarah and
Yeah.
and,
Cave.
they moved on.
In a cave he bought from somebody else.
Yep. And just moved on. And so then the story now transitions. The same promise that God made with Abraham, he reaffirms to Isaac.
Yeah.
And Isaac has 2 children, Esau and Jacob, and they are twins.
Yep.
All right? And Esau is born first, and then evidently there was no time between the birth of the first and the second because Jacob was born second, and his name actually means heel catcher because he came out hanging on to the heel of his brother Esau. And that sign of conflict and struggle, wrestling would characterize their relationship
Their whole life.
and we'll unpack that in just a little bit more.
And it shows how serious they were about that whole birthright thing.
Yeah.
Like if you can grab onto somebody's heel, like
Yeah.
You'd almost say you were born at the same time, right?
Yeah, we'll just split it. They're
like,
twins.
Yeah, like we're both it. But no, like, and it's a huge difference when it comes to like inheritance, and it comes to birthright, it comes to blessing, which becomes a huge thing.
Yeah, and so there's two major issues that the story kind of Jacob and Esau, the sons of Isaac and Rebecca, kind of revolve around, and it's the birthright and the blessing.
Yep.
The birthright is kind of bestowed on the firstborn at birth, and the blessing is conferred on the firstborn at the time or shortly before the father's death.
Yep.
From the father to the firstborn. And Jacob, the secondborn, weasels, manipulates, might as well call it for what it is. He steals it.
Yeah. He and his mom, they both deceive, and at certain points he's asked direct questions, and he just flat out lies.
On the birthright.
Yeah.
Or on the birthright.
Yeah, on the birthright he does. It's not like he just painted
the blessing,
like...
on the blessing.
Yeah, the second one.
Yes, the blessing.
He doesn't paint like an
birthright
incomplete picture.
Finds Esau at a weak moment and takes advantage of it.
Yeah.
He does. So it takes advantage of an impulsive guy.
Yeah. And he says, what good's it going to do? I'm going to die anyway.
Yeah.
You know, let me
Totally
have it eat.
impulsive.
And then the thing is, if you were to think that thing through, if I eat it and I don't have my birthright,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so he just lived in that moment.
He did.
And never saw beyond it. And,
Absolutely.
And God's eternal. He sees the end from the beginning, but he was very short-sighted on that. And so the story revolves around them. They have conflict and struggle, and they don't get along. In fact, the story kind of culminates where they hear that Esau, Jacob is told after he does all of this, that he's told that Esau's coming.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think Jacob quits running, and I think he's just resigned himself. Well, if he kills me, he kills me. You know?
He's pulling out all the stops to make sure that doesn't happen. Hey, here's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. All the wealth I accumulated because I stole your blessing
Take all this
and
stuff.
your birthright. Yeah. And so, but it keeps moving the story of redemption forward, because then we transition out of Isaac to really the narrative follows Jacob
For a long time, yeah.
for a long time, and Esau comes to be kind of this second, kind of a minor player in the story.
Absolutely.
And the story follows Jacob, and he falls in love.
He does.
Love at first sight.
Yeah.
And he is smitten and wants this beautiful girl named Rachel, and
The trickster gets tricked.
the
It
trickster.
does, yes,
That's
exactly.
a great phrase. The trickster get first. Tell us about.
Yeah. So Jacob falls in love with Rachel and has to have her, has to marry her, and so goes to her father, asks for hand in marriage, and father says, absolutely, work for me for 7 years. Work for me for 7 years, and you can have my daughter. 7 years he works and labors and works and labors, and then the time of the wedding night comes.
And for 7 years, he's looking.
at
He
Rachel.
is, and it says that it seemed like only a minute.
Only a day.
yes.
Yeah,
Isn't
like
that
this
just-
7 years,
isn't
he's
that like a
still
Hallmark
crazy about
movie
her.
right there?
It really is.
Hallmark
It's
moment.
very heartwarming.
That's a line right there.
That's a
Yeah.
line. That's a line.
That's a line.
So works for 7 years.
Yes, for Rachel's hand in marriage, and then on the night of the wedding, the father tricks him and presents him with Leah, the older daughter, instead of Rachel. And then he's upset, he's angry, he still wants Rachel, and Dad says, okay, well, you can have Rachel for another 7 years of labor for me.
Thankfully, like, he gets to marry Rachel a week later, and not 7 years later.
Right.
Yep.
But like
The deal was to work 7 years.
it was 7 future years, not like the last time where he had to wait 7 years to be.
Then he
full.
works another 6 years for livestock.
Yep.
Yeah. And they keep and Laban is like, if Jacob was a schemer, and he was like, Laban is schooling him.
Yeah.
Even says he changed his wages 10
like a bunch of times, right? Yeah.
Tells him one thing and does another.
Uncle Laban is this goes back to those of you who might be a little older in the TV show Dallas, which was a Friday night soap opera. Who Shot J.R.
Was he
and
the
all
J.R.
that.
Ewing?
But yeah, he was the J.R. Ewing of the Old Testament. I love your line. He was he out-tricked the trickster.
Yeah.
And so finally, he works 20 years. He's had enough, and he leaves Laban.
Yeah.
All right? Esau's still mad at him. Now Laban's ticked off.
Yeah.
You know.
Laban comes after him. Really unique thing. God speaks to Laban, and there's nothing in the text that leads you to believe that Laban is a follower of Yahweh. He's got household gods. He's got his own gods. But God speaks to him and said, "Don't you touch him."
Don't touch it.
Yeah. Now, this is an important point that you guys are making right here, is that we tend to kind of sanitize our Old Testament saints.
Yeah.
And Jacob, oh, what a wonderful man he was. Oh no. If he could manipulate and trick you out of something, a birthright, a blessing, a herd of cattle, a wife, I mean, he would. And that was who he was. And that's
Absolutely.
You know, but God loved us anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
and God didn't bail out on his promise
Yeah.
because the same promise he gave to Abraham,
Yeah.
God reaffirmed with Isaac, his son, and then reaffirms with Jacob, even though Jacob's not the firstborn, he has the birthright of the firstborn, so he receives the blessing that God would, through his offspring, bless him with a land, a people, and that all the world would be blessed. And of course, that's a future prophecy of Jesus Christ coming
and that was
dying
God's
on
plan.
the cross for all of our sins.
That was God's plan before all the scheming and everything took place. Because it says that God told Rebekah that the older would serve the younger.
Yes.
Before they started trying to pull all the strings on their own to make it happen. Yeah. So God had a plan for that all on his own before they did that.
Josh Smith, he works with our teens. He serves, him and his wife, Josh and Christy, serve with our teen ministry. And one of the things they would always say on our mission trips, he would tell the group, he said, "I know God is going to work on this trip. The thing is, he's either going to work through you or in spite of you, and you have the choice in that."
Yeah.
And I think we see God's faithfulness here working in spite of.
Yeah.
Well, in one of the low minutes here for Jacob doesn't have a lot of hero highlights when you look at Joseph, even when you look at Abraham and Isaac, sacrificing his son. Jacob really doesn't have a ton of those. And one of his lowlights is he actually says this, chapter 28, verse 7, "If God will protect me, if he will provide for me food and clothing, if he will return me safely to my father's house, then the Lord will certainly be my God."
Yeah. And you're already like, do you not see what he's already done?
The fact that you're still breathing
Yeah.
and somebody that you conned out of something hasn't killed you yet is evidence that God is furthering the promise through you.
So here's the big takeaway before we keep diving into Jacob, because in chapter 32 he wrestles with God, and I want us to get there. But God wanted to be with his people. He created all that there is in time and space so he could be with Adam and Eve. They sinned. But God still loved humanity enough that his purpose of wanting to be with us didn't change. And so he had this plan that through the nation of Israel, which started with Abraham and his son Isaac, and then his grandson, Abraham's grandson Jacob, that the Redeemer, the Messiah, would come. Yeah. And we tend to think that all of these were picture-perfect people, and they weren't. Yeah. They all had sin in their lives, but God used them anyway.
Yeah.
And listen, if you're reading the Bible and you go, "Man, I am not as good of a dude as Jacob," you're probably right. You're probably better. But God used Jacob, and God wants to use you for his purpose, because it hadn't changed. He wants to bless the world, through those that know Christ. Well, then Jacob is running. Laban is chasing him. Esau is trying to find him. And so he goes to chapter 32, and we find where he wrestles, verses 22 through 32, he wrestles with the devil or not with the devil. He wrestles with God. Oh boy, that's a faux pas. Jacob wrestles. Can we edit that out? Jacob wrestles with God all night long. Now, how do you picture, let me throw this out at you guys. How do you picture that wrestling went?
Well, it's interesting, you know, and I think it's always good to have questions that you can't answer. Yeah. Because our whole life we study. But it's at the one part where it says that, like, basically it paints a picture of he wrestled with God, and it sounds like when God couldn't beat him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I go, what? When God couldn't beat him? Like, I'll tell you, I don't really understand the mechanics of that. That, like, of course God could have beat him.
Yeah. God
could have done anything. I think it was a voluntary withholding, but I mean, it's unusual. Pastor Mike, tell us what you think.
If he can touch his hip and drop him,
right.
I'm pretty sure he wasn't giving his all.
Yes.
So here's how I see it.
Okay.
I have 3 boys. And ever since my boys were months old, I'd get them on the floor and I would lay, with my arms around them, and we would just roll. Mm-hmm. Just slowly roll across the floor. And then they get a little older, and I'd be on the floor and I'd throw them up on the couch. And they would roll back off the couch and fall back on me. And then I'd throw them on the couch, and they'd get a little older, and now they're jumping off the couch, and they're on me. And I think if I am, and I've never heard anybody say this, so this is like, don't record this.
I love this.
But I think it's that kind of thing that for Jacob, it was all out using every bit of his strength. Then my kids got older, and we were so poor we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, so I came up with this game, Wrestle for a Penny. And each boy would go into a corner of the room, and I would take a corner, and we'd flip a penny in the middle of the air. And we would wrestle for that thing, and we'd do that for hours.
Awesome.
I could have won every single one of those.
Yeah, I want to see a remake of that.
They would kill me. Yeah.
Let's get those 3 boys in.
But I could have won that every single time.
Yeah.
There were times while it was easy for me to wrestle for that penny, man, I tired those boys out every single time. And I think that's what's happening. I think God wanted to be near Jacob. Jacob was just trying to get a blessing because he's still self-centered.
Yeah.
He still has that, if you will do this for me, and if you will bless me, and if you will, protect me, then I'll worship you. And so then they wrestle all night. God certainly had the power and the upper hand to, as Clayton said, drop him at any minute if he can just...
Yeah, because he touches him and he's like limping from there on out.
Yeah, the rest of his life.
Yeah.
To remember that night that he had been with God. And so then you go fast forward to chapter 35 and you come to a really important... He goes back to the same place, right? Bethel. Yep. He goes back to the same place, Bethel, which means house of God. Yep. And he changes the name to El-Bethel, which means the God of this place.
Yeah.
And I think it's in chapter 35 where he starts to get his priorities a little more in line with the blessing that God had given, to his grandfather, to his father, to him, to prepare the way for the coming Christ.
Yeah, I agree with you, because prior to that, he refers to God a lot of times as my father's God, God of my fathers, the God of my ancestors. And at that point, he changes, and you can see it in his actions, because he says to them, give me all your pagan idols and your earrings. In this context, earrings, of course, are neutral, but in this context, earrings were also kind of like a good luck charm related to some of the household gods and stuff that they had there. So what he's saying is like, hey, let's get rid of everything that stands in its place as God, except for the one God who now I'm going to serve wholeheartedly as my God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, unfortunately, it kind of took him getting to the bottom.
I did too, yeah.
He's still in fear of Esau. He's still in fear of, there's a covenant made, but he's not on good terms with his father-in-law. And now they've just come out of the whole thing with Hamor and Shechem and his sons killing all of them. And he says, "You've ruined me. You've ruined us."
Oh yeah, you've made us a stench, or you've made us stink among all the nations around us.
And so there's not a lot left.
Yeah, and again, setting the scripture in the story of this beautiful, remembering that the Bible is this beautiful story, beautiful narrative of redemption, shows that no matter how bad you've got, have gotten, God still will forgive you and use you. I mean, clearly he forgives him because, like you're saying, his language is just clearly different in chapter 35. And
he gets a new name to go along with it.
And he gets a new name, and this is where the name Israel, which means Prince of Nations.
Yeah. So it's not two different characters.
Nope.
If you're not familiar with it, it isn't Jacob, Israel. Right. It's his new name. God changes names a lot for people, and he actually changes his name in that moment. He gives him another name for him, because at the end of that, he changes his name to Israel. But then God says, "I am El Shaddai, God Almighty."
And then it was probably in that moment, this is just my own interpretation, that he went, that's the dude I wrestled all night with.
Yeah.
And he could have killed me like that.
Yeah. It's important in that paragraph, the couple paragraphs, that you read the whole thing, because in the beginning it looks like it's a man. Because it uses the word man 2 or 3 different times, and you think that, oh, he's wrestling with a man. But then if you go on, he says, basically, all my lands, I have seen God face to face and have survived.
Yeah. So then, makes peace with Esau, makes peace with Uncle Laban, has 12 children. One of those children is named Joseph. Now, it's not that the other children are not important, but Joseph now steps to the forefront to carry the story of redemption and salvation and deliverance, and moves it forward for us. And so Joseph ends up in Egypt. And he ends up in Egypt simply because
they can't stand him.
His brothers can't stand him.
It's interesting. He's the 11th. He's like the 11th boy.
Yeah, out of 12.
Right. So the culture says the first boy gets everything, and we're going to put all the focus on the first boy, and he gets stuff. And God says, "No, I have a plan that's like totally beyond and above culture, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do." And boy number 11, he's going to carry the promise forward.
Yeah. And Joseph was favored by his father.
Yeah.
He could interpret dreams. And so he was the only son who got the coat of many colors.
Yeah.
And then the brothers were jealous. They all wanted to kill him.
Yeah. You wonder how early that jealousy even started, because, okay, he's the son of Rebekah, who Jacob clearly, that was his favorite out of his wives and his slave wives. And so you would think the boys would even see that then growing up, well, he's Rebekah's son.
Yeah. And at one point, he's a shepherd for one of the, in essence, stepkids.
Yeah, he's working for them.
Yeah, he is working for them.
So he goes and he's chatting it up. They're going to kill him. One brother says, "Wait a minute, don't kill him."
Yeah, the oldest brother.
The oldest brother. He didn't want to put his, birthright in jeopardy. And so they said, "Let's just throw him in a pit, and we'll take his garment, shred it, throw blood on it, and tell our father. And then whatever happens to him is a God thing. Whatever the gods want to do with him.
Like
then it's God's fault, not our fault, And then a caravan of Egyptians happened by, and they have an idea. Reuben says, "Listen, let's don't kill our bro.
What do we gain from that?
Let's make a little extra side money here on this little hustle." And they sold him into slavery. Yeah. And so now one of the sons who God had promised his father that the whole world would be blessed through his offspring was now sold into Egypt as a slave.
Yeah.
And you say, what is the significance of that? I think, first of all, if you fast forward to the New Testament, and remember we're talking about redemption, is that we've all become slaves to sin, and Egypt represents this, metaphorical kind of place of sin and where we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And yet God came and redeemed him and didn't leave him there. And we'll talk more about that week. But so he goes and he gets hooked up with this guy named Potiphar, who's a sergeant of arms in Pharaoh's castle, palace, pyramid, wherever he's at. And then he's doing the right thing, making the best of a bad situation, trying to honor God the best he can. And Potiphar's wife
Had an eye for him.
had an eye,
Yeah.
had a thing, was lusting after this young man.
Like a pattern. Like wasn't a one-time occurrence.
No, she pursued him.
Yeah,
And-
over and over and over. And he's kind of
Finally,
like
is
stuck.
presented with an opportunity where it's just the two of them.
Yeah.
Tries to take advantage of him, and he flees.
And then when she was spurned, then he ran.
Oh, yeah.
She grabbed his coat
Turn the story on.
Story changes.
and
all of a sudden.
flipped the story, lied about him.
Yeah.
Potiphar probably was suspicious, I think.
I mean, I wondered. I wrote
of
myself
his
some notes
wife's
on that. Yeah.
reputation.
Because
to-
that's not, like, that's a character issue. That's not an isolated thing. It's
No.
weird that, like, so you got this Joseph who pretty much is faultless in running
Yeah.
the administration. Like, he's got no complaints, there's certainly no moral complaints about Joseph. And, like, his.
trusted him with his
Yeah.
life.
And so his wife is, like, approaching him, like, she had to have some stuff not in the right place habitually. And yet he like wholeheartedly believes his wife instead of Joseph. And you wonder, maybe was he in denial, or would he have looked bad to the servants and to everybody else if like he had admitted like okay, my wife likes this servant guy more than she does me.
Maybe it's all the above.
Yeah, and it's probably a really complicated issue, but he just wholeheartedly chooses to side with his wife's version of the story, throws him in jail.
And the bottom line is now Joseph, who was rising to have a certain amount of freedom
Yeah.
as a slave in Potiphar's house, now even loses the standing of a slave. He is
Yeah.
in jail, in the bowels of a prison,
Yeah.
and that's where we'll pick up the story next week. Keep reading. Remember that God uses flawed people
It's a story of grace.
to carry the gospel of grace so that his purpose of redemption can be fulfilled in all ages. And you've seen it already, how he redeemed Joseph, there at Bethel, and you're going to see it again in the story of Joseph. Keep reading. This is exciting stuff. We'll talk next week.